Advancing the cause of liberty takes more than just coming up with ideas. It means making them happen. This is Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Society and the State. I'm Brian Hyde, along with Connor Boyack, and we're going to talk today about how to get media attention for your cause. Now, for some people, that may actually be kind of a head-scratcher. Do I really want media attention?
Do I have a cause?
Well, for that matter, yeah, you better have a cause, I guess, if you're going to start out. But, Connor, I think you have a lot of experience from the standpoint of trying to get a message out and using media effectively to help get that message out. I have a background of a little over 30 years in the media, and so between the two of us, I hope we can put some of the pieces of the puzzle together today for our listeners to help them better understand how the media works, and if they have a message that's worth sharing, how to get the media to help them share their message.
I think the first thing that's important, Brian, and you'll know this from your perspective as having been in the media, is that these are people. This is not some abstract, apparatus, corporation, whatever. These are human beings who have incentives, they have deadlines, they have biases, they have preferences, they have patterns. And so you need to kind of understand who you're trying to target. So let's come up with a specific example. Let's say that we're working on here's a project. I'll be very specific. So we have this project called the Children's Entrepreneur Market, and this is kind of like a farmer's market, but it's run entirely by kids. And so we say, okay, we want to get some media attention. We want people to know about it. We want people to come out and support it. We want to raise awareness about the free market and entrepreneurship and all these important ideas. And so the first thing that I would do in a case like this is I would try and identify who are the reporters that cover, a similar beat. Who are the reporters that have written about anything similar in the past? Maybe it's a story about a farmer's market. Maybe it's a story about a kid's, book fair, about a school event. Who kind of covers these like school ideas for younger ideas? So doing a little bit of research to try and understand who's doing something similar within that space. And then the other thing to recognize, Brian, and I want to throw it to you after this, is these individuals have to come up with content. These reporters are required to find stories every day, day in, day out. And a lot of times they're pitch stuff, and a lot of the stuff they're pitched they can't or won't cover. But they're always on the hunt. They have this insatiable, ever-present demand to try and find the next story. They want to break a story. They like exclusives, right, because they want to set themselves ahead of the competition. But, so you've done talk radio for a long time. Maybe talk from that perspective about you are having to find people to interview, stories to cover. What's it like from your perspective that we could, as someone trying to get media, tap into that and say, well, wait, this guy's on the hunt for content. Maybe we can match up and I can make your job easier for you.
Well, part of that search for the next great story, the element that's always a part of every decision of which story we're going to go with is they're trying to determine what is going to appeal to our audience, what's going to bring eyeballs on the television tube or on the computer screen or, newspaper subscriptions or people dialing in on the radio. So there has to be something that relates to the audience. I go back to when I very first started in talk radio, I wanted to be very careful not to talk about anything anybody could disagree with because I didn't want to get labeled. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself interviewing the ladies who planted the roses down by the courthouse, and I had somebody on, and I'll tell you, the hardest show I've ever done was a 1-hour show on composting, a composting workshop. And if there was anything to say about composting after the first 15 minutes, other than in a society of, botanists or something, I don't know what it would be. So it was just really miserable. And I'm sure that the listening audience was not there. I don't know. Maybe there was a botanist who just was listening to hear my slow meltdown, but the bottom line is I noticed a direct correlation between how my audience grew and, for that matter, how they participated when I started talking about things that mattered to them. Mm-hmm. And so if you're trying to get into the ears or, get into the camera lens of members of the media, you've got to be able to convince them that what you have to share with them or your cause or whatever you're doing is going to be relatable to their audience.
Good or bad, right? Because if someone were to come to you and say, okay, let's use the specific example when you were on the radio, and let's say someone was going to come to your city and stage, a pro-war protest or a pro-abortion protest. Maybe it's something your listeners would hate and not agree with, but it's something that they're going to care about, right? It's something that's going to matter to them, good or bad. And so if you have a controversial position, if you're doing a protest, whatever's happening, Of course, it's no surprise to say that the media loves controversy, right? It gets clicks, it gets eyeballs. They probably changed the station when you were talking about composting.
I can't imagine anybody being riveted by that conversation.
But anything that's taking a firm position one way or the other is going to engage people whether they agree or disagree. And again, that's what the human beings involved in the media want. And so if you can frame your project, your effort, whatever it is you're doing, as having some line in the sand that's going to cause debate, cause discussion, I think that's going to be attractive, right? Because they're going to recognize that this isn't some boring story about composting that people, going to cause people to fall asleep and begin to compost themselves, perhaps. This is something that's going to engage a lot of people, right? And that's going to be good for them. It's going to be good for their advertisers. It's going to be good for the incentives that they have in place. So controversy helps. You don't want to needlessly create the controversy.
Right.
But if there is some angle, some, bold position you're taking, I mean, when we pitch the children's entrepreneur market, we talk about how we changed the law in Utah, first one in the nation, to say that kids, minors under the age of 18, now have a completely free market. No permits, no licenses, no nothing needed. You've heard about these lemonade stands getting shut down around the country. Hey, this can't happen in Utah anymore. Okay, well, all of a sudden the reporter's like, well, that's interesting. Should minors have market anarchy? Like, is that an okay thing? And so you get kind of the leftist outlets who are like, and then you get the rightists who are like, hey, yay, that's great. But you draw that line in the sand, and it's going to get people to engage one way or the other. I think that's crucial.
One of the keys, too, is passion. And I don't want you to mistake drama for passion. A person who is passionate about what they're doing, and it could be any wide variety of things. You could see, this is one of those places. If you got someone who really was passionate about raising earthworms, you could have a very interesting story there. But if it's just someone who's raising earthworms and they're really kind of indifferent, and there's the bedding, the worms are in, nobody wants to see that. But passion is what that is the fuel that drives a lot of media engagement. So the more you can bring passion to what you're doing, and part of that is going to be believing in something enough that you're willing to get out there and work to bring attention to it.
Yep.
And I know there's the saying, there's no such thing as bad press, but you can do it in productive ways or you can do it in unproductive ways. You don't want to come off like a kook. There's a wonderful meme out there that shows a guy in a lab coat and he's holding up a beaker in a laboratory and he's got DNA symbols behind him and everything, and the lettering under it says, "What I think I look like when I'm speaking." And then there's another one that shows this guy with his tinfoil hat, and he's just crazy-eyed, and behind him are pictures of UFOs shooting holes into the World Trade Center, and it says, "What I probably sound like." You don't want to sound like that second guy. You want to be polished, and you want to be credible in your presentation.
Another thing that people struggle with when they're trying to figure out how to get media attention is the actual mechanics. How do you go about, is it a press release? Is it a press conference? How do you actually do this? And while press releases are good as just kind of a shotgun approach, you get a list of email addresses of a bunch of reporters. You can compile this yourself by just going to the different news sites in your community, finding, let's say you work in a business context or a political arena. You find the reporters talking about those issues on their website and just compile all their email addresses. Now you have a list. And if you've got a press release you want to send out, you send it to them. And if the reporters are interested enough, they're going to run it by their editors and say, hey, what do you think about this story? Do you think that's okay? And if they get approval, they're going to reach back out, set up an interview, whatever. So you compile a list of contacts and, sure, send a press release. This part is very easy, right? You can find plenty of templates online. It's pretty simple. It's very formulaic. You come up with a quote or two. You put in some details. You email it out. You see what sticks. Now, press releases, if it's unless it's like a big issue that the public already is concerned about, let's say in our case, legalizing medical cannabis. When we send a press release on that because there's some milestone or something happening, we get a call from every media outlet in the state because obviously this is an issue they've all been covering. They care about it. They're going to report about it. But let's say you've got a new issue. Let's say, go back to this example, the children's entrepreneur market's never been done before. No one really knows about it or cares or whatever. And so you have to start from scratch. The best thing that I've seen work, again, remembering that reporters are individuals, is approaching them individually, right? If I'm given a sales pitch in a room with 50 people, it's very easy to not take action because someone else will cover it. Someone else will worry about it. Whatever. But if someone comes up to me and says, hey, Connor, I've got this idea. I'd love your help spreading the word. What do you think? I'm going to take that very seriously. I'm going to give it fair consideration because they approached me individually. And especially if I have any sort of relationship with the person, I'm going to care a lot more.
That's the key right there. And so you need to do your research before you approach someone. And if you can find that there's a common ground, I'll give you an example. About 3 years ago, I got a letter from an author, which this is not uncommon. You know, radio hosts and TV hosts always get letters from authors. Hey, I've got this new book out. Would you like to interview me? Because that's part of how you get out and promote your book.
Sure.
So I get this letter, and this guy was like, well, I've written this book, and I was wondering if maybe you'd like to take a look at it and maybe interview me. And my first reaction was, I get a lot of these all the time, so I really wasn't that interested. He followed it up with a phone call to me. Did you get my letter? Yeah, I did. Well, I was really hoping that we could talk. And then he said the words, I was at Bundy Ranch. And I went, click, hello, yeah, we definitely need to talk. Because suddenly I realized this guy shares an experience that I was at Bundy Ranch too. And so based on that, I was like, I got to talk to him. I want to get his take on things. And in getting to know him, that was Lavoy Finicum, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Who had written his book, Only by Blood and Suffering, and it was published about 3 years ago. And as a result of him reaching out to me and making that connection decisively, he came on my radio show numerous times. I think I recorded about 9 hours of interviews with him.
Wow.
Now, he's deceased, but can you imagine how important those interviews are to his family who are continuing trying to get his message out? And it happened simply because he reached out the right way, very polite, very nondescript, in that letter. But what really made the connection was I realized, whoa, this guy and I share some common ground, and bam, I was engaged.
So this is something that I have found to be the key to success across a wide field of, I don't know what I'm trying to say, across a very diverse range of activities. So let's use our work as an example. So we have policy work. We have to go up to legislators, elected officials, and persuade them to pass the proposals that we have to, protect freedom. And you know what? When we have relationships with those legislators, it's much easier to get them to run our bills, to vote for our stuff. This is why lobbyists are so successful. They go to, golf and they go to, events and everything else. They've built a relationship. They've cultivated a relationship. This is basic human nature, psychology, to say people are more likely to do things for and with the people that they like, with their friends. You want to be someone's friend who you want to influence, not in a manipulative way, but in a persuasive, positive way. And so, so elected officials, having a relationship helps. Fundraising, right? If you've got to raise money, if you've got a donor who has known you for a few years or has observed what you've done, or you've, sent a birthday card for his kid's birthday or whatever, you've cultivated a relationship, they're much more likely to say, yeah, no, I love what you're doing. I want to help. Same thing with the media. These are individuals. Everything works on relationships. When you know a reporter, or when you've been following them and on social media and interacting with them for a few months or whatever, when you've put an investment in where they kind of know maybe who you are or what you're all about, when it's time to leverage that relationship, you're much more likely to have success. When I go to a reporter and pitch a story, you know what I usually do? I text them. I say, hey, we're working on this thing. Do you think this would be of any interest? Oh, well, let me talk to my editor. I'll get back to you. Oh, yeah, totally. Send me the details. Especially when I say, hey, I'm coming to you first on this. Do you want an exclusive? And then they're hooked. They're like, oh, if we don't take this, someone else is going to get it, right? And so, we've gotten to the point where we have relationships with reporters where if I want to plant a seed, if I want to, get a story run, I'll usually just send them a text. I mean, I'll still do the press release so they have all the official stuff, and then I do the shotgun to all those other reporters that I don't have a relationship with or don't really care to have a relationship. Maybe it's a smaller outlet or whatever. So you still do the press release, but you leverage the personal connection you have to give them a call, shoot them a text, and just say, hey, we're working on this. We're doing this event. We're staging a protest. We're whatever. Would that be something that you guys think you'd like to cover? And if you've invested a little bit of time and energy in the months or years leading up to that to cultivate a relationship, you're going to have much more success.
I've seen firsthand when the Utah legislature's in session how you have cultivated respect among enough of those reporters that when an issue comes up, and to their credit, they're trying to be fair, they're trying to get all sides. If they want the freedom side, they'll come talk to Connor. They will seek you out. And that's not the kind of thing that developed overnight.
Yeah.
I mean, that took some careful and diligent nurturing and building of those relationships and establishing that trust. And I think more important than that, you have never betrayed that trust. And by that I mean You've been consistent to your message and consistent to what you're doing. You didn't get sidetracked into making it's all about me and building a monument to yourself.
Well, and if you, to talk about not breaching that trust, if I give someone an exclusive, I'm not going to undermine them and send it to somebody else, right? And so you want to be fair that way. If you, and it's reciprocal. Sometimes you'll send something called embargoed, like you'll send an embargoed report or press release and say, hey, we're sending this to you guys now so you can work on your story, but you're not allowed to send it or publish it until, Monday at 10 a.m., right? Or whatever you want to say. And if there's any reporter who breaches that trust, they know that they're not going to have access to your, insight or whatever in the future. And so there's kind of this reciprocal thing going on. But another thing I think, Brian, that's important with this, if you're trying to use somebody, that sounds horrible, but if you're trying to get the media to report on what you're doing, do you think that they're going to be likely to report on your issues when you bash them all the time? Like, so if you say, hey, Chicago Tribune or whatever, right? Like, oh, if they look you up on Facebook and they can find posts you've written about the Chicago Tribune and that you've been blasting them, maybe they're not going to be as likely to cover your story or do you a solid, right? And so be careful about maybe criticize the media in general or in the abstract, but you want to be careful because, like with me, with our work in elected officials, the elected officials who I've taken occasion to blast and to criticize for their awfulness in a very direct way and naming them, I don't have influence with that legislator. And that was a calculated decision on my part to say that the need to call attention to this awful thing here outweighs the need I have to have influence with this particular legislator, in the future. And so sometimes that's necessary to call someone out or to do something like that. But recognize that if you've been criticizing the liberal rag in our community, and then you pitch them, 4 months later on a press release, maybe you're not going to succeed.
As a general rule, name calling is going to detract from what you're trying to say. And I know it feels good. I've done it myself. It's fun to stick a clever label on somebody or something. But it ultimately, it lowers your credibility because it's just a couple of steps above, the kind of taunts you would encounter in the schoolyard. And I was going to ask you, Connor, you've spent a fair amount of time working with the media and working to be a credible spokesman. What tips would you offer when you do have the media's ear?
Yeah.
How should you present yourself or conduct yourself to ensure that you keep it?
So the first thing I would do is to say practice, and literally, mirror in the bathroom, practicing like, what am I going to say, right? Like, okay, they're probably going to ask me this and this. How would I respond? Maybe you get someone else to practice and role play along with you. That's something that we do in our office with newly hired people, and we'll actually role play and try and practice a little bit. But if it's just you in your bathroom with a mirror, practice, because you don't want your first attempt to be stuttering, horribly on camera. So you want to have a message. You also want to make sure that you're brief. Please recognize that if you talk for 4 minutes about how important this project is, no one's going to be able to use that. The newspapers don't have space in the column. The TV, they don't have enough length, radio, everything else. You have to be brief. You have to learn the art of brevity. I learned this through writing. I learned early on from some really good editors that you have to cut. If it doesn't serve the plot, if it doesn't really inform and inspire, you have to cut it. Get rid of the fluff, get rid of the chaff. And so you have to learn that, and this is the hardest thing I think for people to learn, because we get an idea and we just kind of keep rambling, just like I'm doing right now, and you keep on going, and filler is important. I think this was instilled in us in 3rd grade when they said you have to have a minimum 4-page essay, and you have like a page and a half worth of content, and so you have to fill it. Right? Because you had this arbitrary requirement of length that you had to do. I did that myself. I remember in particular essays that I've written that I just had to come up with like random stuff to throw in there.
Adjective power, activate.
And so I think now we have to learn the opposite, right? Cut it down. You have to figure out how to convey your message in 10 seconds. And here's the other important thing. Let's say you're talking about something controversial. The best advice I've ever been given is what you see not very well done by politicians, and that is to repeat the most important soundbite over and over again. So let's say the media, so just the other day I did an interview, okay? The reporter talked to me for easily 10 minutes, maybe more, peppering me with all sorts of questions. He used one answer to one question in the whole interview because he was interviewing 4 other people for the story, talking to them each for 10 or 15 minutes. This isn't an hour-long, thing on TV. This is a 90-second little clip, maybe 3-4 minutes if you're lucky. But then you have all these other voices, and then you have the reporter who's kind of editorializing and reporting. And so I got one statement across out of, I don't know, a dozen or two that I had offered in this interview. A lot of people find that very difficult to imagine because they worry, oh, well, what's he going to pick apart? And but if you are on message in every statement, if all of your statements tie back to your core thesis, your argument, you're going to be safe. Because let's say I was doing an interview last week on civil asset forfeiture, okay? And it was this court case we're involved in and trying to protect property rights. And so the reporter's coming at me with all these different questions. What do you think about this? And what's the outcome of this or whatever? And I was trying to make sure that in every answer I gave, I was tying it back to two things. Number one, this is a big problem when the government can take property from innocent people. And number two, the public overwhelmingly opposes this. Those were the two arguments that I wanted to convey. And so almost to a fault, almost annoyingly, in each of the answers I give, I try and always tie it. You don't say the same thing necessarily, but you always want to instill those two things in the answer because I know that only one, maybe two of my answers are going to get used. And so I want to make sure that in whatever they use, my main points are getting across. That takes a lot of practice to convey.
Something that's very helpful for getting your ideas and your thoughts consolidated into something that can be conveyed very quickly is what's called a Hoover article. And my understanding, I think President Hoover was fond of these. I'm not sure exactly. That's the legend I heard. But a Hoover article, very simply, is a one-page paper with two columns, and so it's short. But the idea is you write that Hoover article explaining what it is you want to explain, and then you go back and you bold the two most important sentences. The idea being that this is the kind of thing that you could hand to somebody, they could look it over, and in the space of 2 minutes, they would know what your central idea was. And then, if that grabs them, they can go back and read a little bit more detail. But it also forces you to cut all the unnecessary stuff from it. You purge the dross from it, and what you're left with is usually a pretty concise idea. And the best thing of all is maybe it's not even as helpful for the person who's on the receiving end of it as for the person who's writing it to get their thoughts down in a concrete form rather than just being abstract and undeveloped.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, it's one thing to get media attention for your cause. It's another thing to utilize that media attention well. It's not enough to just merely get on TV. Hi, Mom, look at me, I'm on TV. Like the whole reason we're doing this is to be persuasive, recognizing that the thousands of people who are watching you for 8 seconds, you want to leave them with a message. You want to teach them, you want to inspire or motivate or enrage them. And so if you squander that opportunity, sure, you can tell your Facebook friends or post on Instagram that you were on TV, and how exciting will that be? But that's not why you're getting media attention. It's not for vanity. It's for persuasion. It's for effectiveness. And so it's one thing to get that media attention, but when it comes, you need to be ready for it, right? And it will take practice. I look back at my early interviews, and I cringe, right? We all do when we look back at when we were first getting started. So it'll take practice. But the best advice that I can leave from my experience is to cultivate those relationships. Be seen as a source. Be seen as a thought leader. Be seen as a doer, so that when the reporter who's trying to be, fair and balanced, when he's looking for someone who opposes that big new highway they're building or the eminent domain project that they're doing in your community, they know from past experience, oh, this guy's going to have something to say about it. Now, I'll leave you with one other little tidbit. An average individual who cares about something is not going to get a voice in the media because you're just one person of many. Everyone's got an opinion. You have to represent something bigger than yourself, right? So when reporters come to our organization or they'll come to me directly for an interview, they know that the thoughts I have represent a significant portion of our population. That's why they want to talk to me. It's representative in a way, okay? And so if you are trying to get media attention for your cause, maybe it's a one-off event and that's enough because you represent, all the kids in the kids market, or you represent this big trade show or whatever, and that's well enough. But if this is just an issue that you care about, a project that you're working on, you have to be bigger than you are. And maybe that literally means you and some friends start up this organization, very informal, not legal or whatever, but you just come up with a group and you name your group, the Citizens Who Care About Clean Communities. Right? And now you're the spokesman or you're the founder or whatever. And reporters have no clue how many people are involved. They don't know your membership or anything else, but you have a title. That is what is important, right? When they show you on TV and the little lower third graphic comes up, they're not going to put, Brian Hyde, concerned citizen, right? But if they can put Brian Hyde, founder of, the Organization for Peace and Prosperity, that's at least something. That gives them something. So that's just a little parting tip I think that would be helpful, is to recognize that if you want to be proactive in getting media attention for your cause, you have to be representative. You have to be a voice for many. And if that means setting up an organization to kind of fake it till you make it, so be it. Brian, I'm going to leave the parting thought with you here, because you've been in the media for a long time. You've given attention to a lot of causes, including our own. When I was starting Libertas, you were very willing to have me on, talk about what we were doing. What final advice would you give? I imagine we have a lot of listeners who have their own cause, their project, their organization. What's a parting tip that you might offer in the way of trying to be persuasive, trying to be successful in getting media attention?
I think the thing that I have seen over the years, the most effective people in getting the attention of the media and then getting their message out via the media were the people who understood most clearly what they stood for. So if you have any doubts, or if you struggle to come up with a cohesive and coherent message, that's the first place I would start, and then watch it fall into place from there. Thanks for joining us. This is episode 75 of Society and the State. Coming up on our next episode, we're going to have a very timely discussion about foreign interventionism.
With Senator Mike Lee.
It's
a ton of fun. Tune in. We'll see you guys next time.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.